I'm James Beckwith, President and CEO of Five Star Bank. As a community bank, we believe that open dialogue about the issues affecting our region is vitally important. From the economy to the environment to social issues, we look forward to the conversations and hope you'll join in.
Welcome to Studio Sacramento. I'm your host, Scott Syfax. What gives Sacramento its sense of place? And how has Sacramento changed over the years? One man thinks he knows. Joe Genshlea is a nationally recognized, award-winning attorney and a proud Sacramento native who has strong ties to our community. He's also the author of a one-man play where he offers his reflections, recollections, and ruminations on a well-lived Sacramento life. Welcome, Joe Genshlea.
Thanks, Scott.
Joe, you know, you've lived life in Sacramento, and it's an amazing fact that you grew up and still live today within one block of the place that you were born. How has the world changed in all of those years?
Well, of course, Sacramento was a small town when I was born in '38, and it was still less than 100,000 people probably when I was born here. The funny thing about the neighborhood I live in, though, there's quite a number of other people that have done pretty much the same thing. Some of the folks that I grew up with are still living in the same houses. I at least moved a block.
Wow.
So, but it does give you an interesting perspective. You're kind of standing in one place and watching things happen around you. And of course, the town since the Second World War has just exploded into a much larger metropolitan area of over 2 million people now. So, big changes.
Well, you know, one of the things that you've said before is that Sacramento really was, in its inception, a world-class city. We have a lot of conversation today about becoming a world-class city, but you remind us that Sacramento has been a world-class city since its inception.
Yeah, I think the whole concept of world-class is a little bit vague. I think things are what they are, and Sacramento has been a wonderful place, for me anyway, growing up. But I mean, it was central to the development of the West. Unlike Portland and Denver, we're the same size as those cities, pretty much.
How so?
Well, first of all, the discovery of gold, when that happened, of course, California was largely uninhabited. And it brought people here from all over the world. And then shortly thereafter, with the four downtown merchants, Huntington, Hopkins, Crocker, and Stanford, went back and got Lincoln to sign the legislation to build the Great Transcontinental Railroad and made the country from sea to shining sea, and brought huge capital into the country and brought more people from around the world to Sacramento. So we've had a hugely diverse population here from the very beginning. A great, exciting Chinatown was along I Street, and Japantown just south of there along M Street. And
Japantown was on M Street?
Capitol Avenue, right where I practice law right now. It was and actually, M Street was Highway 40 from San Francisco to Chicago, and you came across the Tower Bridge and wound your way through Sacramento, and eventually kept going, you'd get to Chicago on the old Lincoln Highway. But yeah, it was the Japanese community had been here for generations, way back into the 19th century, and there was a very active Japantown there before the Second World War, and of course we all know what happened then. But I went back and checked, and 100 years ago, there were 23 Japanese restaurants right around there.
On Capitol Mall?
Well, yeah, within a couple of blocks there.
Wow.
And of course, there was a big Portuguese community, a big Greek community. Actually, the oldest mosque west of the Mississippi is at 4th and V, has been there forever. There was a Buddhist church at 4th and O. There's the oldest synagogue in the West was at 7th and M, Capitol. Mm-hmm. So we've had. You know, I'm from a long line of Shanty Irish myself, but there was an Italian Catholic church. The St. Francis Church out in 26th and K was originally built as a German Catholic church.
Now, your neighborhood in Land Park really was at one point the edge of town.
Actually, when I was growing up, the other side of Land Park was just farms. There was no South Land Park. It was Sutterville Road was the edge of town there. There was an old deserted brewery across the Sutterville Road from where the zoo is. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it was the end of town. And Freeport Boulevard was just a little 2-lane road.
And in terms of the growth that has happened in the region, one of the things that you also talk about in your show is how Sacramento, prior to the 1940s and 50s, really had a sense of place that you feel is somewhat lost today. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, if you look back at the town I grew up in, there were all kinds of problems. Of course, there was a lot of rampant racism. I mean, there was ghettos and what have you. And but the people that ran the city invested in the city. And the city, if you look at the city schools, Sacramento High School is a beautiful school out on 34th and Y. California Junior High School in Vallejo and Lampart Drive was this beautiful school, and they were knocked down because of an inability of the legislature in 50 years to retrofit them for earthquakes. And they invested in parks. If you just think about a town now, it was less than 100,000 people in Sacramento at the time of the start of the Second World War, and we had William Land Park, Southside Park was a beautiful park, Curtis Park, McKinley Park, McClatchy Park, parks across P and Q Street, parks across 27th and 28th Street. I mean, there was parks. We invested in sports. We had great sports facilities. We had a great ballpark at Riverside and Broadway for the Solons. This town of only, 100,000 people, we had a 22,000 seat football stadium, Hughes Stadium.
It's interesting that you mention those things, because one point that's been made by others is that Sacramento, in its history in the mid-20th century, was a place that made a lot of public investments into public spaces that were important to the community from an architectural standpoint and just from an amenity standpoint. Where does that spirit still exist today?
I don't think so, actually. I think that with the explosion of the population after the war, of course, people moved here from all over, and they really have, I don't think, had a sense of where they were living in a historic way, and it became so balkanized. I mean, we have 25 cities and 6 counties that we're spread across the metropolitan area of Sacramento. And not only that, but the city of Sacramento itself, it went from having all the city council members elected at large to having districts. And so, there's very few people looking out for the city. The mayor is the only one that technically represents the whole city. And we pay a city manager a lot more than we pay a city councilman, and the council, in my view, is supposed to act like a board of directors, and the manager runs the city, and that's how things, I think, used to get done,
right.
But they don't get done anymore.
Given your experience in this region and your love for this town, what are 3 or 4 things that every person moving to this region should know about this town?
Well, I think some of the history I just mentioned, I think it's, if you don't realize the centrality of Sacramento to the development of the West and what you're looking at, the rivers here, of course, Sutter came up to the Sacramento River and turned right at the American River and went out to 28th and C and walked a couple of blocks and started his fort, and that's where the gold rush came from. And great people have come from here. I mean, just on the current basis, if you think about the national scene and the intellectual, I talked about the capital that railroad brought it, but the intellectual capital that Sacramento's produced. Joan Didion's great author. Tony Kennedy's a swing vote on the Supreme Court. Tani Contil-Sakawi is now the Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court. Wayne Thiebaud, world-renowned artist. Richard Rodriguez, great commenter on modern America. Cornel West, a guy without whom there's no serious discussion of race in America. It was Stanley Fawn, who grew up around the corner from me. He's the world's leading authority on Parkinson's and related diseases, and I could go on.
Wow.
And so Sacramento has a great, when people talk about celebrity, they seem to focus on TV personalities and sports heroes, but Sacramento has contributed to the intellectual life of William Vollman, who wrote Europe Central, lives in Sacramento, and he won the National Book Award a few years ago.
Well, turning for a moment to some of those celebrities and like, in your upbringing, there were a number of people who came through Sacramento. Surprising in your show to learn about how Sacramento really was a place that attracted some of the most famous icons of the 20th century. Who are some of the ones that you remember the most?
Well, of course, my dad was the Secretary of Boxing for almost 30 years. So I grew up, and actually, if you think back at the time we're talking about, there was 4 great sports in America. And there were boxing was one of them, horse racing was one of them, professional baseball was one of them, and college football, where those were the four big sports. And so boxing was part of my life growing up. And interesting, Max Baer just lived a couple blocks away from us, and his kid Max Jr., some people know as Jethro.
From the Beverly Hillbillies.
Beverly Hillbillies.
That's right.
We all went through school together, and there's a great, I have a great this picture of my dad and the ball players going up to play ball at Folsom with Max Baer and his brother Buddy Baer, who was also a great fighter, and playing baseball in the main yard at Folsom Prison with fellows from the major leagues, Ernie Bonham and Joe Marty, a bunch of guys. My Uncle Bill got to go up there. My dad got the boxers and stuff, and much closer community, I think. Of course, it's a small town. It's easier to be a close community when you're in a small town.
You know, you mentioned Max Baer. Sacramento produced a heavyweight champion of the world. And you grew up right around the corner from him, as you said. Tell us a little bit about the former champ. We've seen him, we saw one dimension of him in Cinderella Man, but who was he really?
Oh, Max was a man. I mean, he was a town celebrity in a way, and he was a very gregarious guy. He loved everybody. He called everybody champ, and he was around town in a convertible. He had one of those Chrysler Woody convertibles when we were kids, and he would wear. He had a big medallion around his neck. I think it was St. Christopher on one side and Star David on the other side. I can't remember exactly, but he was a great guy, great character, very friendly. Took care of all the neighborhood kids. I remember being over there when Maxie and I were just growing up, and he was waiting to see if Max would be as big as he was, and he got the tape measure and measured the two of us, and we probably had 30-inch chests, and he had a 54-inch chest.
Wow.
Anyway, it was fun having Max around, and I also got to, because of that, I got to meet a lot of the fighters that you'd come through town and fight, Joe Louis and Rocky Marciano and Archie Moore and these guys.
Now, you tell a story about Primo Carnera, and you were just a couple years old at the time. Tell us a little bit about your encounter with Primo Carnera.
Well, when we went to places like this, Dad, of course, could go back in the locker room. We were down in Southern California, and Carnera was, after his career was over, he was the fellow that Max beat for the title. And he became a wrestler, and he was wrestling down at the Olympic Club in Los Angeles, and we were there. And so Dad said, "Do you want to meet Primo Carnera after the wrestling match was over?" And I said, "Sure." So we headed back into the locker room, and Carnera is just getting out of the shower. And of course, Carnera is 7 feet tall, and I'm just a little shrimp. And I'm walking towards him, he's getting out of the shower, and I'm saying to Dad, "I don't think I need to meet Primo Carnera, you know." He reaches down, "Hello, kid, how are you?" And I, "Get out of here, Dad. You know, I think I've seen enough of Primo." You know, it was one of those crazy experiences. So funny.
Well, let's step a little bit into today. It was interesting. A couple of months ago, Forbes magazine published its misery index, and it rated Sacramento as higher on the misery index nationally than Detroit, Michigan. How does a proud son of Sacramento respond to Forbes magazine?
I just don't know how they come up with some of these things. Sacramento, we were having hot weather today, but as I said, you know, it reminds me of getting on the elevator with somebody complaining about how hot it is in Sacramento and asking them if they've ever been to Houston. Mm-hmm. Hot days in Sacramento, it ramps up to 100 and it ramps back down to 70. And it's dry heat, and people can laugh about it, but if you go out today, you're going to find people out in the golf course, out in the tennis courts playing. Got trees everywhere. We've got two beautiful rivers. We spread from the Sierra foothills across the Sacramento River Delta. It's a lovely place to live, really, except for the coast of California and Hawaii. I think it has the best weather in the country year-round. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't know what weathermen do around here, really. They should just say during the summer it's going to be warm, and during the winter it'll rain occasionally. That's about all you have to say about the weather around here.
You know, in your show, after watching it, the word that came to mind was curator. And almost like you're a curator of what's been wonderful about our region. Today, what great things about this region that you notice on your travels here and there throughout the city and the surrounding area do you think that we're taking for granted and need more care and attention?
Well, First of all, I want to go back and remind people that, you know, when in the time when I was born, Chinatown was Chinatown partially because of racial discrimination, and Japantown similarly. And if you were an African American and you moved here after the war, you were told there's only two places you could buy a house, and that was in Oak Park or Del Paso. And there was white clauses in the deeds, and you know there was that part of Sacramento existed. And one of the great things that's happened in Sacramento is that it's gotten so much better. That much of that is gone. Not all of it's gone, obviously, but
according to the last census, the most diverse city in the United States.
And as I've said, have always been. I think Sacramento, it just doesn't vision itself as Denver and Portland do, and it doesn't do great things. What it did, if you look at even the Memorial Auditorium, the Alhambra Theater, and some of the things that were built, the Elks Building and some of the bank buildings and things, it built monumental projects. William Land Park is, you know, 200-acre park or 250-acre park in a town of less than 100,000 people with a zoo and all this. They invested in themselves, and we don't invest in ourselves anymore. And one of the critical things that's going to happen with Sacramento is this flooding problem. You know, we and I have talked about that, but it just last weekend in the New York Times Magazine, there's a 2-page spread about Sacramento being the most exposed city in the country for flooding, and we don't take it seriously. We're whistling in the dark, as my old man used to say. You know, you're just pretending it's not going to happen. So the community, the 23 or 4 or 5 cities and counties, the 6 counties around here, need to get together and deal seriously with that problem, but also to recognize that we are one economic entity. Okay, the MSA is one economic entity. We all live together in we breathe the same air, we drink the same water, we have the same crimes,
Right.
And we need to think as one unit.
But Joe, is it a question of will as well? And I'm going to go back to something that surprised me, and that is when Measure Q&R failed for the new arena a couple of years ago, there were a lot of observers who said it goes to prove that Sacramento is not willing to support major projects and the like and come together around a big idea. But then, and that Sacramento in the past would, but then in doing some research, the old Alhambra Theater, which for old Sacramentans like yourself was a rallying cry in terms of how it is that we lost part of our heritage because we allowed the destruction of some very important places. But in researching the real story, Safeway gave Sacramento every opportunity to save that building, and ultimately it was put before a vote of the people, and the people at that time refused, 55 to 45, to support a local initiative in order to save the Alhambra. And so you fast forward to today, where is that public will of spirit in order to do the big things for our region?
Well, I'm not sure it's there, frankly. I'm not sure that there is the sense that we want to do something great for our own community.
How do we get it back then?
With better leadership, I think, really. I mean, we spend our time concerned about the Kings, and I'd love to see the Kings stay here, and I'd love to see an arena built for the Kings. But it's still a relatively limited focus on that arena, and I think a larger, small d democratic facility might fare better. But to get somebody in South Placer County to decide they want to spend money on an arena in Sacramento, or to get the people of Sacramento to shoulder the burden for an arena when it serves people in South Placer County, is a problem. And until you get the community to think together as one unit, it's going to be very difficult to get these things done, because people don't associate themselves. If you live in Davis, you think you don't have anything to do with Sacramento, when in fact you do, most of the people.
Now you have a big idea on this. If you were king, how would you change the political structure in order to make it more conducive to people being invested regionally and really being their brother's keeper?
Well, as I said, I think this making districts out of the city has been a problem for the city, because the only person that's really in charge of the city as a whole is the mayor, and the other members of the council see themselves representing districts. And over the years, from time to time, we've tried to make a city-county consolidation, because in fact the county of Sacramento is urban, it's not rural. And so, I mean, it makes little sense to have a county and a city when you really have just one big city, which would be a start. But you need to have some regional concept of the fact that we are one entity. And if you look at what Denver and Portland have done for their communities, it's remarkable. And what we haven't done is also remarkable. Partially because we're in the city, in California, Sacramento doesn't, I mean, Portland and Denver kind of have the state to themselves. They're the biggest, fish in the deal. And so Sacramento is in California, it's a small town, even though it's 2.2 million people. I mean, the Bay Area and Los Angeles, San Diego, huge areas. 40 million people in the state or something. So it's complicated to get it done. I mean, that's what Valley Vision was about to begin with, was trying to get people to see the community as a unit. And I think they've done good work, but it hasn't gotten there yet.
Now, but expand out from that. So I hear one solution as let's get rid of districts and go citywide for the city council, but expanding that out in order to take in the geography of the region. You talked something about something like moving toward more of a New York style of local government.
Part of it is it's kind of like the stock market. It's all in your head, If you're in Rio de Janeiro and somebody asks you where you're from and you live in Fair Oaks, you'd probably say you were from Sacramento.
Right.
But if you're in San Francisco and they ask you, and even in San Francisco you might say you're from Sacramento, but from here you're at Fair Oaks. You live in Fair Oaks, you don't live in Sacramento, or you live in Roseville, you don't live in Sacramento. So it's a mindset to some extent. And in New York, the 5 boroughs in New York are all separate counties in New York. And yet they all think of themselves as New York City, even though they're the Bronx and Brooklyn, Staten Island, Manhattan, Queens. They all intellectually think of themselves as New York City. And if we had the borough of Davis and the borough of Elk Grove and the borough of Folsom and the borough of Roseville, maybe we could get everybody to think we really are Sacramento, and then we could do something for posterity. People, I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about. What are they? The Memorial Auditorium, okay, is really a beautiful building.
Sure.
It was built for the First World War. Sacramento probably had 75,000 people in it then. Okay, look at that building. It's a building built by a town of 75,000 people, and it had, as I said, I went to see the Ice Capades there, the circus there, the Harlem Globetrotters, saw Joe Louis fight there, went to funerals there, went to innumerable horrible speeches there.
Every concert I produced was there.
I danced to Count Basie there.
Sure.
Went to an opera there. I mean, went to mass there. I mean, it was, and it's a great community facility. That was built for posterity. That's still a great building, and we're not doing that. We're not investing in what are our grandkids going to have here. What is it that we think is I think less like Portland, more like Ileton. We don't think in the big terms.
Right.
And we have the resources to do those things, and actually some of these things actually create wealth. Great parks like Land Park creates wealth.
Great museums.
Great museums. I mean, it's great what they've done with the Crocker, but there's lots of museums looking for places to go. The zoo's looking for a place to go. The horticultural garden is looking for a place to go. There's all kinds of facilities around looking for a place to go.
Well, the reverse of looking for places to go is looking for places to stay. And you, being a world-class litigator, successful on many different venues, you could have left and gone anywhere. What's kept you in Sacramento?
Well, when I was in college, I wrote a paper. I forget exactly what the assignment was, but it came back from the instructor saying, it sounds like, you're stuck on Sacramento or something was written on this thing. And my family came here really out of the famine. I've got, 3 of my sets of great-grandparents are buried here, and I've got a great-great-grandmother buried here, and they're all out of the Irish famine one way or the other. And my grandfathers and great-grandfathers all worked at the SP shops, So, I mean, I've had such a long history here, and I grew up, I had cousins and aunts and uncles, and my dad was one of 5, my mother's one of 6 kids, and so it's kind of, as I say in those shows I did, you know, you have a sense of place when you grow up like that. There's so many interconnections, and it's a lovely place to live. I mean, trees.
Tree.
Trees are beautiful.
Trees.
Trees are beautiful. Everybody should have one in their front yard.
Well, I want to give you the last word.
Okay.
And in 30 seconds or less, tell us, what is your vision or wish for Sacramento over the next decade?
I wish that people could get over the idea that they're living in separate communities, that we don't have one big metro area that all depend one on each other, you know, so that they do see themselves again as living in an environment which is consistent across county lines and city lines, and that they get back to investing in themselves in great schools, great parks, sports, and all the things that people need in great urban communities.
Well, I'd like to thank our guest, Joe Genshlea, for joining us and sharing his thoughts and ideas as a Sacramento native. That's our show for today. There's lots of talk on television, but very few places where you can be part of the conversations that matter. I'm Scott Syfax, and you've been watching Studio Sacramento. Join us next time, right here on KVIE.
I'm James Beckwith, President and CEO of 5 Star Bank. As a community bank, we believe that open dialogue about the issues affecting our region is vitally important. From the economy to the environment to social issues, we look forward to the conversations and hope you'll join in.